Hey everyone, and welcome. So today we are tackling a really interesting question that sits right at the heart of business law. When can a decision your employee makes end up being your company's debt, even if you never gave them the direct green light? We're calling this one the accidental contract. All right, let's just jump right in with a scenario. Picture this. Your best team lead, someone you really trust, goes ahead and orders a huge shipment of new equipment. They were sure it was the right call, but well, you never actually signed off on it. Then the invoice shows up. So, who's on the hook? It's a very modern problem that, believe it or not, has a surprisingly old answer. And to find that answer, we've got to go back in time. Way back. We're heading to Australia, 1958, where a pretty simple disagreement over some farm equipment actually set a legal precedent that's still super important today. Okay, so the scene is Kerrigan's Hazeldean farm. Just imagine it. Rural Australia, a time when a person's role in a handshake really meant something. And it's right here that our story gets started. You know, the setup for this is actually pretty simple. You've got just three key players. First, the farm owner. He's the one with the money. Then you've got the farm manager, the guy running the whole day-to-day operation. And finally, the seller, which was the International Harvester Company. Now, the way things worked was totally routine. The manager, just doing his job, would order goods that were essential for the farm. The seller would ship them over and, as always, send the bills straight to the owner. It all seems perfectly normal, right up until the owner decided he wasn't going to pay. And that right there is the core of the problem. A purchase was made by the person in charge of running the farm, but the guy who actually owned the place never gave his direct okay. So the big question is, who has to pay the bill? The farm owner's argument was basically, hey, I didn't personally approve this order, so it's not my problem. But the seller, of course, saw things very differently. They were like, look, your manager was in charge. His position is his authority to make deals for you. And there you have it, a classic standoff. So the court had to look past this one single deal and think about a much bigger idea, the kind of power that just comes with a person's job title. And this is where it starts to get really, really interesting for all of us. The key legal idea here is called implied actual authority. Now, this has nothing to do with what's written down in a contract or an employee handbook. It's all about the authority you can reasonably assume someone has just based on their role and what they do every day. So where does this implied authority actually come from? Well, it's a mix of things. First, there's the job title itself. Farm manager sounds pretty official, right? Second, it's about the normal everyday tasks of that job. And third, it's about what that person has been allowed to do in the past. It's all three of those things combined. All right, so let's get to the decision. The judges took this big idea, this principle of implied authority, and applied it straight to what was happening on Hazeldean Farm. And the court's thinking was just incredibly logical. They basically said, look, the whole point of a farm manager is to manage the farm. And you can't really do that if you can't order the basic things you need. It just makes sense. So the verdict was crystal clear. The farm owner had to pay up. Why? Because by putting the manager in that position in the first place, the owner had unintentionally given him the power to make these kinds of deals. The contract might have felt accidental to the owner, but in the eyes of the law, it was very, very real. Okay, so you might be thinking, why are we digging up some old case about a farm from 1958? Well, because the principle behind it is, frankly, more important now than it has ever been. This one idea, this implied actual authority, it shapes so many things that happen every single day in business. Think about it. A marketing manager who books a big conference venue, they're probably not getting a signature for every little expense. Or a project lead who hires a freelance designer, it just falls under their project. Or even a chef who orders from a new supplier. They're all acting on the authority that's implied by their job. And this really affects almost everyone. If you're a business owner, you have to be super clear about where the lines are for your employees. Because this authority isn't endless. Your farm manager probably can't go out and buy a new sports car on the company dime. If you're a manager, you've got to understand the power that comes with your title. And if you're an employee, knowing the scope of your role is just critical. Which really brings us to a final question for you to think about. In your own job right now, what authority do you have that isn't actually written down anywhere? The things you just do because it's part of your role. Understanding that is probably the best way to avoid creating your own accidental contract.